Hello, my friend. Welcome to the study. Today we're going to look at some more Great War aviation. We're going to be looking at the Cross and Cockade International Journal for the First World War Aviation Historical Society, a British publication. We'll also be looking at a few issues of Over the Front Quarterly, and this one is the publication put out by the League of World War I Aviation Historians in America. And as you can see, we'll have lots and lots of planes and flyers from the Great War, including some airships. And we're just going to page through and look at some interesting things. And I thought first we should have a little tipple. So, in keeping with our Great War theme, we should have something that the aviators would have had. The amount consumed by officers in the Great War was copious. Great War Fliers carried the nickname Suicide Club and had a life expectancy of weeks, flying solo with only a few hours of training, going into combat in a canvas machine with no parachute, watching comrades fall to fiery deaths. It's no wonder they were heavy drinkers, and many consumed stiff brandy to give them courage to go up again, which many of them had to do as soon as their machines were fueled and serviced after a sortie. The Royal Navy, the preferred tipple was rum. So there was quite a bit of brandy and rum drunk, as well as champagne and gin. When the dashing aristocrat Herbert Buckmaster entered the war as a captain, he joined the drinking officers at Saint-Omer, Rouen, and Boulogne, where the champagne was served with other spirits. After the war, these men, wishing to continue their copious drinking habits and unable to fit in back home, encouraged Buck to start a drinking club. And he did, called it Buck's Club, and they would relive old friendships and wartime drinking binges, and became home to the Buck's Fizz, a champagne and orange juice cocktail. The one we're going to make today is called a John Collins. This cocktail is said to have originated in the 1850s, but its name was changed to the Tom Collins. It is said because the type of gin used was Old Tom, which was one of the early forms of gin, a sweetie type gin, of the two accepted types of gin in the bartender's books. Whether or not it has ties to Old Tom Bell in the tower at Christchurch College in Oxford. We shall never know. Let's mix ourselves a John Collins and have a look at some aviation books. So to make our World War I related aviation style cocktail, we're going to use some gin, some syrup de gomme or sugar syrup, Schweppes soda water, lemon, and ice. So we'll start with our iced shaker, and I've probably said before, I really like the Bombay Sapphire because it's very aromatic and lovely tasting gin. I've got our measure there, so we'll do 1.5 measures of gin. This cocktail would originally have called for Old Tom gin, but since then it's probably changed its name to a John Collins. And now we're going to squeeze some lemon. So we're using about 1/2 measure of lemon and 1.5 of gin. There we go. And this cocktail calls for, in its original recipe, 1/2 or a teaspoon of this icing sugar or powdered sugar. I could use that, but I'm going to use the modern recipe and put in some syrup de gomme, sugar syrup. Just a little bit. And then we shake that. Now it's nice and frosty. Pour a little bit of that in there and top it up with some soda water. You'd normally garnish with a slice of lemon, and the modern cocktail calls for maraschino cherry. But I don't like it so sweet, so I'll keep it like this and probably put a lemon in it. So there's our gin-based Flyboy cocktail. John Collins. Let's have a look at some of our Over the Front and Cross and Cockade. The Cross and Cockade International Journal. This one is about 20 years old. And there we have several Sopwith planes there. One of them looks like it's nicknamed Binky. We also have the names of the pilots. This one is Chi-Chi Simpson in the 8th Squadron, Royal Naval Air Service, December 1916. F. Booth and 10th Squadron, Royal Naval Air Service, January 1918. F. V. Hall, A Flight, 10th Squadron, Royal Naval Air Service, January 1918. Flight Lieutenant McGregor, B Flight, 10th Squadron, Royal Naval Air Service, January 1918. Look at these beautiful wheel markings there, and this one has got some beautiful blue. This one for Captain Sykes. This one is 203 Squadron, RAF, Royal Air Force, May 1918. The Royal Flying Corps, having been the British Air Service until the end of the war, when the RAF was formed. Australia was the first to have a dedicated Royal Flying Corps called the Australian Flying Corps. And here we have Franz im Feuer, 4 Jahre Flugzeugbeobachter. 4 years an aerial observer. Franz under fire, Arthur Pfleger, Hauptmann. So this has been translated. It's a bit of a biographical article about this man who was an aerial observer. And you can see one of the planes is crashed there. You can imagine the risk that these men took. There's his camera. Every time they went up, you had to have a lot of courage or be a real daredevil. There's a photograph he took from the air. And here is a dirigible and the basket they would sit in to take these photographs over the front. Artillery Observer School. There's their camera, a huge apparatus in an open cockpit plane. Again, the camera and where it was placed, and a photograph of the trenches at the front and these huge craters that were formed. Look at all of that. It's from shelling. I think that the Western Front is one of the most moving places I've ever been. The War Memorial at Verdun, after over 100 years now, still brings tears to the eyes, as it was built on top of the bones of all of the dead soldiers. And and townspeople as well. And you can see the bones all along the foundation of the memorial. Under glass. Doesn't matter, German, French, British. They were all there. And the continuous shelling and bombing at the front over years and years made a huge mark on the landscape. Much more than ever was inflicted at Waterloo after the battle, when they built the hill to commemorate the battlefield, for which Wellington was very angry. We have all these photographs here. NCO's quarters, some specialized workers, carpentry shop, and the instructor's office. And here we have Royal Naval Air Service, Airship Service, the Air Construction Corps. The airships were for observers, taking photographs of the front, and also for defending against bombing. There's a coastal type airships were employed from around mid-1916, notable for their tri-lobe cross-section. Here, C-21 is in considerable trouble at Capelle. Looks like it's deflating. A deflating airship. You can see the cockades on them, signifying them as British. The French cockade had a different colour in the middle. The British was red in the middle, while the French was blue. Some photographs where they're building these airships. An airship station. Some of these great hangars are still there in Cambridgeshire. And airships are coming back now for transport. They've done some experimental things with them lately. I don't know if it will take off though. Nice little pun. Look at all these airships used for the Naval Air Service. And this was a time when German U-boats were targeting a lot of ships, even passenger ships. So observers were important. See, the hangars are all camouflaged, so they can't be seen easily from the air. Aerial photo coding. So if you thought coding was interesting, this is a different kind of coding. Look at that. These are maps, they're secret maps of the Western Front and the Middle East. There's Gaza. Photograph of Gaza in 1916, put together from a mosaic. And Gallipoli, probably, in retrospect, one of the most important battles of the war, not for what immediately occurred, but for Australian nationhood. Dear Godmother, anyone who reads about the airmen of the First World War, especially French airmen, soon comes across mentions of marines de guerre, wartime godmothers. Who or what were these strange beings? The Marine had her origins in the Crimean War. That war, apart from being singularly useless, since all of its political objectives were attained before one soldier fired, was marked by a number of firsts. For example, it was the first war in which Britain and France were on the same side since the Crusades. This fact led to a few unfortunate side effects. Since Lord Raglan, the British commander who had fought against the French long ago in the peninsula and had lost an arm there, was sometimes known in a careless moment to refer to his French allies as the enemy, to the astonishment and confusion of his staff officers. And that in the Petit Parisien asked its lady readers to adopt a soldier, and then they would write to them. And this carried on into the Great War. We have all the little facts and figures and photographs from the Great War. Look at that, looks like an SC PFO. H.C. Lake was killed on 5th of April 1918. And then we have sources and pointers for further research. Whilst examining the editions of the Hastings and St. Leonard's Observer for 17 August 1918, I came across this poem by Captain Robert H. Raines, RAMC, from Bexhill. The RAF, eyes of our army, beloved of the nation, dauntless in courage and never sleep. Ever our thoughts turn to you with elation, guarding your trust like our lads on the deep. Babe of our forces, a promising offspring, more than a match for the Huns you have grown. Out of the blue on your foes oft your shots ring, downing their plains, then away you have flown, bombing their dumps of munitions and forces, freer in spirit and greater in will. In the proud veins of your body there courses liberty's blood that no vampires can still. With your reprisals the enemy's towns shake. You have repaid them with interest, brave boys. When you hit back, what a fuss the old Germans make. Death and disaster you've turned into joy. Yes, it is great that your kings of the air, men, noble and true as your brothers on the sea, scorning such slavery, Wilhelm had planned when, ruthless, he trampled on Belgium for free. O'er the Atlantic to help you and France, speed thousands of planes soon, your comrades so dear. Then will you frustrate each dastardly Hun deed, right reign triumphant, the victory's near. So little poem, very obviously dated to the Great War. And there are some ads. Here's an ad for Over the Front, the other journal that we'll have a look at, and several other publications, and a story about that flying ace, that famous literary flying ace, Biggles, Captain Bigglesworth. And this one written by Peter Dye, the last ace of the First World War. Biggles was a very popular character in boys' literature, and books written about him, all fiction, and his companions by W.E. Johns. There's some more Biggles there. Very entertaining for a young boy. Also very dated, but nonetheless, like anything, it's a product of its time. And as W.E. Johns was in the Flying Corps himself, it's got some very interesting perspectives there. You can see how people looked at things. You can understand a little bit about the planes and the pilots and what was going on at home as well. And there we have some more planes. Lieutenant A.S.G. Lee, Royal Flying Corps, August 1917. Lieutenant Hadrill, May 1917, 54 Squadron, Royal Flying Corps. Lieutenant D.H. Voss. That's an interesting name because we had Werner Voss, V-O-S-S, in the German squadrons. 28th Squadron, Italy, 1918, Royal Flying Corps. Lieutenant A.S.G. Lee, 46th Squadron, Royal Flying Corps, November 1917. And Sea Flight, 70 Squadron, Royal Flying Corps, February 1918. Some beautiful drawings there, Cross and Cockade. Let's have a look at the American editions of Over the Front. Now I must tell you, I came upon these. They were passed on to me, as they had been passed on to the previous owner, so they're quite old. I think most of these are from the 80s. And when I lived in Berlin, it was after the wall had come down, and I used to go to these shops and places that were just opening and selling everything they had found in the bookshelves and stores of places where people had stuffed things, old bookshops and people's attics and things like that. And I found one place that was just selling boxes and boxes of old German publications from the Great War. Someone had left them there since the Great War, and they had survived all those years, and they were selling them. And at the time, I was not very... And at the time, I didn't consider myself affluent enough to justify buying all of those, but it would have been great to have taken them home and had a look at what was in them. Here we have, looks like an airplane factory. And this publication by Great War Flying enthusiasts, and very well researched articles are published or were published. I don't know if interest is still there like it used to be, but here you see photographs of this is a French aviator and his family. La Noblette, March 1917. And this is the pilot aviators. C.D. Winslow, 1916. Look at that, the family sitting there outside. And there you can see some American soldiers and airmen. some early days of the war. There's a Voisin bomber being prepared. And there's a photograph of an airplane collision. Look at all the holes in the wings from the bullets. It must have been utterly terrifying. And the British Royal Flying Corps refused to give their pilots parachutes, saying that it would make them cowards. And there, all the faces of the men going up. And one of them has a pet dog. And this is looks like a French and American squadron there. And a Chinese aviator flying with the French. And from Escadrille 115. So we've got some write-ups on the dailies, the daily reports. Look at these men. They must have been utterly fearless. There's a photograph taken from the plane in flight. And there. In what? These are just kites. Here's one with a dog. Their mascot for the Escadrille 110. Santis. Some more pilots. Maxime Lenoir and sous-lieutenant Antoine Paillard. And Perdigui. Vacher. Jean Vacher is this one's name, and Michel Mathieu. And these are two Americans serving with the French Escadrille. Santis. Look at this, the first and only night bomber to go into active service with French Air Service. And there we have some dailies from the French squadrons. Squadron 25 and 66. And we have a notice in German here. Achtung, englische Truppen sind in Ostende gelandet. English troops have landed in Ostend. They are occupying the city mit den belgischen Truppen, with Belgian troops, and are fighting in alliance with those allies, and with King Albert and his troops. They're moving forward. Die Vororte von Lille sind von unseren Verbündeten besetzt worden. So the Germans are occupying Lille. Die Stadt ist vom Feinde geräumt worden. They've rid the city of the enemy. And here's some more dailies from the French squadrons. Listing the men, the pilots, and mechanics as well, and reports. And here we have a map. France and Western Germany. Look at that, and there's Belgium. The entire western, north part of the Western Front. And there's Paris. That author author looks rather surprised. I don't know who that is, but I'm rather shocked at that photo. That's very unsettling. I don't even want to look at that one. We have a nice aircraft over here, a snipe. So this is an article about this snipe and when it went into service in the Royal Flying Corps. And then we have a photo taken in Milan in 1969. It was a reunion of the First World War pilots. Remember, Italy was with the Allies in the First World War. And this is a very nice photograph of pilot Bohmil Munsar. And this article is about him. He was born in Dvor, Kralove. This would be King's Court in English, a town in northern Bohemia. And that's his mechanic there. Goodness me, a monument to him in Bohemia. It's a very popular flyer. It's truly amazing and humbling when you look through history, even something as recent as the First World War, and see how many individual lives were affected and the different things that happened because of the war. The First World War truly was a world war because the effects were felt all over the globe. Here we have another article about the final dogfight of the Red Baron. That dogfight has been and still is a subject of continuous debate and is incredibly interesting. If you'd like me to do that in a video, do leave a comment below. I've driven along the route of the Red Baron's final flight with an aviation historian in France, and it was quite something. There's another map of the front there. Imagine if you were a young aviator from England to America, or even France and Germany. You would not recognize things from the air. The air was a very new way to travel. And many aviators got lost. A lot of things about aviation were still in their infancy, but wars necessitate quick development. And there's another air crash and another memorial. Losses of the Central Powers during the period of the combined German-Austro-Hungarian air offensive in Italy. And there, the report there of the battle. In many ways, the First World War was the end of the old world and the beginning of the new. And I don't think our world has recovered from it since. From all the effects, the long-reaching effects of treaties and alliances, and the need for building great war machines. You see he's got a huge bibliography there, so he's done his research. And some interesting memorabilia someone's found at a flea market. Lafayette Flying Corps, Escadrille Lafayette. These were American airmen who went over to fight for France, for the Allies, before America declared war. So I think the United States has always been ready to help out privately time helping out both civilians and military alike. It's just the nature of their nation, I think. How they began as a country and the values that have gone through generations of immigration into this country to make it what it is. And there's the Indian that was on the Escadrille Lafayette. There's dispatches and some more ads for books. Royal Blind Corps. And the cockpit. There's another beautiful aircraft. This first year over the front has certainly been an experience. So it looks like this letter that was enclosed in 1986 edition issue is the first one. And it looks as if there was quite some interest in this. They have lots of photographs about all of the airmen from all sides and articles. This one is a biography, what they found. War diaries and letters of Walter Avery. And an ad for Cross and Cockade, the British one we just looked at. And some more doughboys, Walter Avery Center. L'école d'aviation militaire. Oh, and look at that. This is a song that was written October 9th, 1917. Now, in the Yiddish Escadrille, we have a brand new scheme. We subsidize the moniteur and grab an old machine. The government supplies the gas, and if you keep it still, well, we'll take you up for $1.50 in the Yiddish Escadrille. Yiddish Escadrille sounds like it might be a Jewish squadron. Doesn't really say. It's from Texas. Another song. January 24th, 1918, to Ernest H. Leach. It cannot be, I say it cannot be. 'Tis but a moment since he stood here in our little group and smiled and spoke, a moment's flight, and then he passes through the gate that bars our view, leaving us desolate. It cannot be, I say it cannot be, that he who moved among us, winning us all by deeds and words of quiet friendliness, has lived his few short years only to slip away into the vanished past, a sad, sweet memory. He goes on saying, it cannot be, I say it cannot be, such friends can never die. He lives beyond the gate, and when our turn shall come to step across the threshold into a world more fair, he will be the first of those who meet and greet us there. And all the things the aviators got up to. Another poem, lots of poems. A couple more. Aviators at Le Bourget, now a very large airport outside Paris, where they have the air show. The in space. And there's someone with a donkey. Mascot. Look at these young men. And their machines. It's a wonder their nerves were shattered. Look at that. More dailies. And there's their donkey mascot on the building and on the plane. This is reading out the diary. Shall I read some? August 14th, 1918, Wednesday. Had a patrol both AM and PM. And with the 94th, 8 to 10. With the 27th, 16 to 18. No fights, but lots of Bosch in sight. We drove a couple of biplanes back to German territory, dodged a Bosch high patrol and dove off a couple of Fokkers at attacking one of our balloons. Curtis gave him 100 rounds at close range, but he didn't drop. The shelling was only moderately heavy at us, but the French were giving the Bosch lots of white, so that the sky was pretty full of mixed white and black. Ice cream for mess tonight, oh boy. August 15th, 1918, Thursday. Patrol with the 27th, protect a photo squadron of the 88th. Buckley and Mitchell each got a Bosch. I had no close-up fights. I shot up a Bosch town with incendiary and regular bullets, just to try out my guns. 3 of our mechanics were transferred to the infantry, and the other fellows of their billet hung a service flag with 3 stars out in front of the billet. Boots and I have a Bosch helmet that we picked up in Bellow Woods for a waste basket. August 17th, 1918, Saturday, on patrol. This morning, Alex Bruce of our Le Bourget and Tours bunch collided with Walt Smythe at 3,000 meters in a mix-up with a Fokker. Smythe's wings came off and he dropped like a stone. What was left of him they had to scrape up and put in a sack. Alex was not so badly messed up, but was killed instantly. On the PM patrol, my motor went bad and I just barely limped back to the field, wobbling along at 500 meters. The mechanics must have been quite special to work on these machines as well, to make sure these things, these kites with oily engines, functioned as they were supposed to. I have another portrait of a dashing Holden taken about the time of his duty in the defense of Paris. Looks like American wings there. It was very difficult for many of these pilots to reintegrate into everyday life after the war. Many of them had shot nerves and developed a sense of daredevilry, so some of them became stunt pilots. Here's his Newport, Mr. Holden in Escadrille 471 at Le Bourget, April 1918. You can see the camouflage paint. Very pretty, the Newports. And here he is with a Spad. Headquarters, U.S. troops, Paris, American Expeditionary Forces. Special Orders, 20th July 1918. Pursuant to authority contained in letter from Headquarters SOS dated 4th January, the following named officers will proceed from Paris, France to the location of the first pursuit group. So the United States beginning its Air Corps, or what they would call the Army Air Forces, that would later become the Air Force. Army Air Corps, I think it was, like the Royal Flying Corps. And there's a Distinguished Service Cross from the United States Army. And Holden in his French uniform. His family at their New York City home. And there, a map of the Western Front, the Battle of the Marne. An Italian Caproni bomber. Mountainous river terrain. Oh, that is quite a photograph. Look at that. That is absolutely amazing. There's some aerobatics going on there. You can see one plane is upside down. And these Italians there. And there's a ad for people restoring aircraft for Between the Wars aircraft. Now I get to the losses of the Central Powers, so the dailies there, reports, and a camel, Sopwith camel. And someone's put the scheme out, and here we have Rudolf Stark, the airplane there, and Lieutenant Kurt Windkins playing his accordion. And lest we forget those who've gone west. So obituaries of people from the society. Another one. I like looking at these pictures. Another French squadron there. Some more photographs of these young men, young flyers. And this is a German attack on May 1918. Battle plan. Combat log. More photographs. And biographies. It's very personal when people publish the diaries and reports that they find. And I think it's important too that we all remember the personal experiences of these events. There's some German planes. Caporetto. And the Central Powers. An Italian air service. Look at that. All of the smoke there. It was one of the most destructive wars in history. muscle paint on the German planes. And there, Fulco Ruffo di Calabria. I know my pronunciation leaves a bit to be desired. So I apologize for that. See, we've got more combat reports and 64 Squadron, Royal Flying Corps. This article's about the markings of this squadron and the dailies there. Certain parts of these aircraft were actually enormous. The wheels there, skids and landing gear, cockpits. But the aircraft itself was much smaller, of course, than today's. As you see the size of the propeller and the rotary engine there. This is officers of B Flight number 4 Squadron, Australian Flying Corps. Look at all those Aussies. Yeah. And there. You can see that sun there of the Australian cap. Always with a broad smile, the Australians. And pioneers of the air as well. Very enterprising. And as I mentioned before, the first to have a dedicated flying corps. And there's a special section at the Australian War Memorial in Canberra. There's another Fokker with Hermann Göring in the center there. And a biography of Jean-Pierre Bourjade. Handling a gun and Saint Therese there. Yeah. And our last one over the front. All of the parties, the German squadron. Look at the size of that aircraft. That's a Rumpler, badly damaged in September 1918 when it nosed over on landing. The pilot and observer seen standing in front of the aircraft were not injured. Lucky for them. The pup, Jack Malone, the first ace of Naval 3. It's Naval Squadron. The handsome man. I like how people used to pose for photographs. Something about the composition there, just you see in the background someone's actually starting up. So it might be right before he went up. And all of these bombers in a row, naval wing on the morning of the Saarbrücken raid, 23rd of January 1917. Looks very cold. And there you see the Sopwith Pop, the Mina. That's a Flight Commander, Naval Squadron 3. these stories. Look at that, a Roland D2 in flight. Hans Pippert, an ace from Baden. Another young guy. Very handsome. Look at that. And all the aviators there in their uniforms. Must have been a great adventure as they signed up, thinking these new machines that fly in the air. The entire idea of war had been different for their parents than it would be for their children, and how wars were fought. And we have more French squadron dailies, pilot lists. And the story of Lieutenant Wilbert White. Looks like an American flying ace. There's with his family. They're all so young. I remember at the Great War exhibit in London at the Imperial War Museum, there's that famous quote by Thucydides. A great number of young men had never seen a war and were consequently eager to join this one. And I think that was his history of the Peloponnesian Wars. And you can see centuries, millennia later, young men are always very eager to make their mark one way and another. Look at all the photographs there, pinning medals. It's a very personal photograph. He's standing there, Lieutenant Winslow standing in front of his first victory. So he's just captured that German aircraft. And an Italian aviator, Silvio Scaroni. And another one having been shot down. Very grim, very grim. Well, this has been, I hope, relaxing, paging through these aviation pages with you, my friend. I admit it's very moving for me to look at these things. And it's probably been one of the more personal videos that I've made. I hope you've enjoyed spending the time with me in the study for this, and that you've enjoyed your John Collins tipple. Remember, study's always open for you. Whenever you need it, I'm always here. In the meantime, be good to yourself. Be kind to others. And, as always,